The story of the rise and fall of the Aztec Empire is one of the most astonishing transformations in human history. The creation of a mighty civilization that rose from wandering refugees to builders of one of the world's greatest cities, and its sudden collapse beneath the weight of invasion, disease, and destiny. In the early 14th century, scattered tribes roamed the valleys of central Mexico, searching for a sign from their gods. Among them were the Mexica, later called the Aztecs, who would carve an empire from the marshes of Lake Texcoco. From their humble beginnings, they forged alliances, conquered neighbors, and built Tenochtitlan, a city of stone temples and glittering canals that astonished all who saw it. For nearly 2 centuries, the Aztecs ruled through faith, tribute, and warfare. Their world revolved around a delicate balance, feeding the sun with sacrifice, holding the universe in motion through ceremony and fear. Under rulers like Itzcoatl, Moctezuma I, and Huitzilopochtli, the empire spread across mountains and valleys, commanding millions of people. Yet within its power lay seeds of fragility, constant wars, restive subjects, and an unyielding dependence on conquest to survive. When Hernán Cortés arrived in 1519 CE with his small band of Spaniards and native allies, he found not a primitive tribe but a highly organized civilization, vast, spiritual, and deeply human. The meeting between Moctezuma II and Cortés set in motion one of history's most dramatic encounters, where 2 worlds, each believing itself favored by the gods, collided. The outcome would end an age and give birth to another. This is the story of ambition, devotion, betrayal, and tragedy. A story of people who rose from exile to empire, only to face destruction in less than 200 years. The story of the rise and fall of the Aztec Empire. And it begins in the year 1325 CE, when a small group of wanderers, following a vision of an eagle on a cactus, stepped onto a swampy island in the middle of a lake and began to build their destiny. Long before the Aztecs built their city of temples and canals, before the Great Lake glistened beneath the rising sun of Tenochtitlan, there were wanderers, a people called the Mexica. Their story, preserved in codices and in the memory of those who survived conquest, begins in myth but ends in recorded history. The Mexica said they came from a place called Aztlan, a word that means the place of herons, or the land that is white and shining. It lay somewhere to the north, perhaps in the deserts beyond the Valley of Mexico, perhaps only in the collective memory of migration. According to the Codex Boccherini and later chroniclers like Fray Bernardino de Sahagun, the Mexica were one of several tribes that left Aztlan guided by priests and their god Huitzilopochtli, the spirit of the sun and of war. They carried his image, a small bundle of sacred objects wrapped in feathers, and followed his commands through deserts and mountains. Each dawn, they built a new altar, sang hymns to the rising sun, and waited for signs to continue. This journey, lasting generations, would later define their sense of destiny, a people chosen to build the final city of the fifth sun. By the late 12th or early 13th century CE, these migrating peoples had reached the central Mexican highlands. The region was already rich with civilization. The ruins of Teotihuacan, once the largest city in the Americas, still loomed as silent reminders of an earlier age. The Toltec capital of Tula had fallen, its influence scattered among successor states. And in the Valley of Mexico, a wide basin ringed by volcanoes. Yet their stay was short. The lords of Culhuacan, a nearby city of great prestige, soon expelled them. The reasons were political as much as cultural. The Mexica's god demanded blood offerings, and their warlike rituals alarmed the established city-states. At one point, around 1299 CE, They formed an alliance with the ruler of Culhuacan, Coxcox, who granted them land in the marshes of Tizapin. The Mexica served as mercenaries in his armies and gained favor for their bravery. By the early 1300s, the Valley of Mexico was already filled with many city-states, each ruled by powerful leaders. Cities like Texcoco, Azcapotzalco, and Culhuacan had large populations, temples, and armies. Into this crowded land came a group of newcomers, the Mexica. They were once wanderers, often hired as soldiers by stronger kingdoms. But everything changed when, in 1325 CE, they settled on a small swampy island in Lake Texcoco. There, they began building the city that would soon rise to greatness, Tenochtitlan. The story of Tenochtitlan's founding was remembered for centuries through Aztec codices and oral tradition. According to their belief, the god Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and war, had promised them a homeland where they would find an eagle perched on a cactus, eating a serpent. This sign, they said, would mark the place chosen by the gods. When they saw this vision on a small island surrounded by water and reeds, they believed destiny had led them there. Though the land was poor and wet, the Mexica began to build with determination. At first, Tenochtitlan was not impressive. It was a small settlement of huts built on mud and reeds. The Mexica worked hard to survive. They used wooden stakes and volcanic stone to build a foundation that could hold their homes above the water. They learned to create chinampas, floating gardens made by piling mud and vegetation to form fertile islands for growing crops like maize, beans, and chili peppers. This innovation turned the shallow lake into productive farmland, feeding a growing population. But life was not easy. The Mexica were surrounded by stronger neighbors who viewed them as outsiders. They had no noble bloodlines, and many cities saw them as rough and barbaric. The Mexica first served as mercenaries for other powers, especially the Tepanecs of Azcapotzalco, led by Tezozómoc, one of the most powerful rulers in the valley. By working as hired soldiers, the Mexica gained experience in warfare, learning how other city-states fought, organized armies, and managed tribute systems. Over time, Tenochtitlan grew. Its location gave it natural defenses and access to trade routes across the lake. The people became skilled at fishing, farming, and building canals. They created causeways to connect their island city to the mainland and used canoes to move through their waterways. By the mid-1300s, the city was beginning to prosper. The Mexica established a royal line, choosing Acamapicli as their first Tlatelolco ruler around 1375 CE. He helped strengthen alliances through marriage and began organizing Tenochtitlan's society into districts, each responsible for labor, taxes, and military service. The Aztec social structure started to take shape. At the top were the nobles, Pipiltin, followed by the commoners, Masahualtin, artisans, merchants, and farmers. There were also slaves, Tlacotin, who could earn their freedom through work or bravery in battle. Religion was central to life, with priests playing important roles in ceremonies and education. The Mexica built small temples and began performing rituals to honor their gods, especially Huitzilopochtli, whom they believed required human sacrifice to keep the sun rising each day. By the time Huitzilopochtli, Acamapicli's son, became ruler in 1395 CE, Tenochtitlan was transforming from a minor settlement into a growing power. The city expanded through careful diplomacy and trade. They supplied warriors to Azcapotzalco in exchange for protection and political recognition. Huitzilopochtli also strengthened ties by marrying into noble families from other cities, improving the Mexica's reputation among their neighbors. However, Tenochtitlan was still under the shadow of the Tepanec Empire. The Tepanecs demanded tribute and often reminded the Mexica that they were subjects, not equals. Yet within this system, the Mexica learned how to manage tribute collection, record-keeping, and political negotiation. They absorbed the culture of other Nahua peoples, their language, art, and traditions, while keeping their own identity. This blend of knowledge would later help them create one of the most organized empires in pre-Columbian America. When Ximalpopoca, son of Huitzilopochtli, became ruler around 1417 CE, the Mexica's position was both strong and fragile. Tenochtitlan was wealthy, but still under Tepanec control. Ximalpopoca's rule saw growing tension between Tenochtitlan and Azcapotzalco. The Tepanecs began to fear that their former subjects were becoming too powerful. Around 1426 CE, after the death of Tezozomoc, power struggles broke out within the Tepanec Empire. The new ruler, Maxtla, was harsh and suspicious of Mexica. He eventually ordered Ximalpopoca's death, an event that changed everything. After this assassination, the Mexica turned to Itzcoatl, a seasoned warrior and Ximalpopoca's uncle. Itzcoatl became Tlatelolco in 1427 CE, and under his leadership, the Mexica would rise to power in a way that no one had imagined. But he knew they could not defeat the Tepanecs alone. He reached out to other city-states that had also suffered under Tepanec domination. The most important of these was Texcoco, ruled by Nezahualcóyotl, a wise and ambitious prince whose father had been killed by the Tepanecs. Together, they planned an alliance. In 1428 CE, Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan joined forces in what became known as the Triple Alliance. Their goal was clear: destroy Azcapotzalco. The war that followed was fierce and decisive. The Allied armies attacked the Tepanec capital, burning it to the ground and ending their rule. Maxtla was killed, and with him, the old order of the valley fell. The victory of 1428 CE marked the true beginning of the Aztec Empire. Power was divided among the three cities, but Tenochtitlan soon emerged as the strongest. Itzcoatl reorganized the government, destroyed old records that spoke poorly of the Mexica, and ordered new histories to be written, ones that presented them as the chosen people of the gods. He began large construction projects, expanding temples, building new causeways, and improving the city's defenses. By the mid-1400s, Tenochtitlan had become a city of great beauty and power. Its markets were filled with goods from distant lands: cacao from the south, feathers from tropical birds, jade, cotton, and obsidian. The city's streets and canals were clean and orderly. Stone temples rose above the lake, and priests kept the sacred fires burning. Visitors from other lands marveled at the sight of this city in the water. Under Itzcoatl's leadership, and later under Moctezuma I, who ruled from 1440 to 1469 CE, the Mexica would turn the Triple Alliance into a vast empire. Tribute began to flow into Tenochtitlan from conquered provinces, and the city's wealth became legendary. But this rise came at a cost. It demanded constant warfare, strict discipline, and growing numbers of sacrifices to satisfy the gods. By the end of the 15th century, the Aztec world had changed forever. What began as a small island village in 1325 CE had, within a century, become the heart of one of the greatest civilizations in the Americas. The rise of Tenochtitlan was not only a story of courage and hard work, it was also a story of ambition, faith, and a relentless drive for power. After the fall of Azcapotzalco in 1428 CE, everything changed for the Mexica. For the first time, they were no longer subjects of a stronger power. They were free and ready to take control. Tenochtitlan, once a humble island village, now stood beside two strong allies, Texcoco and Tlacopan. Together, they formed what became known as the Triple Alliance, a political and military pact that would shape the next century of Mesoamerican history. Each member of the alliance had its strengths. Texcoco was famous for its wise rulers, poets, and engineers. Tlacopan had military power and trade connections. But Tenochtitlan had something different, a fierce warrior spirit and an unshakable belief that their god, Huitzilopochtli, had chosen them to rule the world. It was this belief that would drive their expansion. The leaders of the new alliance agreed to divide the spoils of war. Whenever they conquered a city, Tenochtitlan would receive 2/5 of the tribute. Texcoco would take 2/5, and Tlacopan would get 1/5. This arrangement was fair at first, but as time went on, Tenochtitlan's power grew so great that it began to dominate the others. Under the leadership of Itzcoatl, the Mexica took the first steps toward empire building. Between 1430 and 1440 CE, they launched campaigns to bring nearby city-states under their control. Their armies marched against Coyoacán, Xochimilco, and Cuitlahuac, forcing these towns to pay tribute and provide soldiers for future wars. Each victory brought new wealth to Tenochtitlan: food, gold, feathers, cotton, and captives for sacrifice. Itzcoatl also knew that power was not only built through war, but through history. To strengthen the Mexica's image, he ordered the destruction of old records that showed them as wanderers or servants. He wanted future generations to see them as noble, powerful, and divinely chosen. New histories were written, telling how the Mexica had been guided by their god to fulfill a sacred mission. This rewriting of history helped unite the people under one identity, the Aztec Empire. During Moctezuma's reign, a terrible disaster struck. In 1450 CE, the region was hit by several years of famine caused by failed crops and floods. Thousands of people died of hunger. To survive, the Aztecs had to trade their children into slavery in exchange for food from neighboring regions. Moctezuma responded by launching new conquests to secure more fertile lands for farming and tribute. This period also saw the building of a massive aqueduct from Chapultepec to bring fresh water to Tenochtitlan, a major engineering achievement that impressed all who saw it. As the empire grew, so did its religious demands. The Aztecs believed their god, Huitzilopochtli, needed the energy of human hearts to keep the sun moving across the sky. Without blood, they feared the world would end. To feed the gods, they organized what were known as flower wars, ritual battles fought mainly to capture prisoners for sacrifice. These wars were often fought against nearby rivals like Tlaxcala and Huitzilopochtli, who resisted Aztec control. By the late 1400s, the Aztec military had become one of the most powerful in the region. Every man was expected to be a warrior, and capturing enemies in battle brought great honor. The highest rank a soldier could achieve was that of an eagle or jaguar warrior, a title given to those who showed great bravery and skill. Victory in war also brought social rewards, including land, slaves, and noble status. Tenochtitlan was changing too. The city expanded in size and population, reaching nearly 200,000 people, making it one of the largest cities in the world at that time. Grand temples, palaces, and markets were built. The Templo Mayor, the great temple of Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc, the rain god, was expanded during Moctezuma's reign. Standing at the heart of the city, it symbolized the Aztecs' connection to both war and fertility, life and death united. After Moctezuma died in 1469 CE, his son Ashiokatl became ruler. He was young and ambitious. During his reign, 1469 to 1481 CE, the Aztecs conquered Tlatelolco, their sister city on the same island, after a bloody civil war. Tlatelolco had long been a rival trading center, but after its defeat, it became part of the empire. Ashiokatl also led campaigns against the Matlatcincas and other towns in the Toluca Valley, expanding Aztec influence westward. But not every campaign was a success. Around 1479 CE, Ashiokatl launched an invasion against the Tarascan Empire, the Purepeca, in western Mexico. The Tarascans were skilled metalworkers, and fierce fighters. The Aztecs expected an easy victory, but they were crushed. Thousands of Mexican soldiers were killed. This defeat reminded the Aztecs that their empire had limits and that not every people could be easily conquered. Ashiacatl's death in 1481 CE brought a short and troubled reign for Tizoc, his brother. Tizoc tried to continue expanding the empire but faced rebellion and poor leadership within the army. His campaigns were weak and unpopular. After only 5 years, he was either poisoned or assassinated. The records are unclear. Then came Huitzilopochtli, another of Ashiacatl's brothers, who ruled from 1486 to 1502 CE. Under him, the empire reached its greatest size. Huitzilopochtli was known for his military skill and his ruthless drive for expansion. He conquered lands far to the south, reaching as far as Guatemala. Cities like Xochimilco and Tehuantepec were added to the empire, and tribute flowed into Tenochtitlan from hundreds of towns. Huitzilopochtli also oversaw the completion of a massive rebuilding of the Templo Mayor in 1487 CE, celebrating its dedication with one of the largest sacrificial ceremonies in Aztec history. Chroniclers like Bernardino de Sahagun and Diego Duran recorded that thousands of captives were sacrificed during the event, though the exact number is still debated by historians. Tenochtitlan under Huitzilopochtli was breathtaking. Visitors described it as a shining city built on water, with wide causeways, canals, and floating gardens. The Tlatelolco market was one of the largest in the Americas, where tens of thousands of people gathered daily to trade everything from food to gold, obsidian, and cotton. The city had schools for children, strict laws, and an organized system of justice. But while the empire grew richer, it also grew harder to control. Many conquered regions resented the heavy tribute and the demand for sacrificial victims. After him came Moctezuma II, who would rule from 1502 to 1520 CE, the last emperor before the fall. Unlike his warrior ancestors, Moctezuma II was deeply religious and saw himself as chosen by the gods. He expanded the empire's bureaucracy, introduced stricter social rules, and made himself more distant from his people. The empire was at its peak, stretching from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean, ruling over millions of people. Yet beneath this power, cracks were forming. Founded in 1325 CE, it now stood as a symbol of what human determination and faith could achieve. From its humble beginning as a cluster of reed huts on a lake, it had become a city of grand temples, canals, palaces, and floating gardens called chinampas. These chinampas were one of the Aztecs' greatest inventions. Built from layers of mud, reeds, and sticks, they allowed farmers to grow crops year-round. Corn, beans, squash, and chili peppers thrived in the nutrient-rich soil. The system was so efficient that it supported a population estimated between 200,000 and 250,000, making Tenochtitlan one of the largest cities on Earth at that time, rivaling Constantinople, Paris, and Beijing. Under Emperor Moctezuma I, 1440 to 1469 CE, Tenochtitlan flourished. He ordered the construction of aqueducts that brought clean water from Chapultepec Hill into the city, replacing the salty lake water that was unfit to drink. He also improved the causeways, massive stone roads that connected the island city to the mainland. Each causeway had bridges that could be lifted in times of war to block invaders. These public works were not only practical but symbolic. They showed the might and organization of the Mexica people. Moctezuma I was also a reformer. He organized the empire's tribute system more efficiently, creating a network of provinces that supplied the capital with goods and resources. Tribute lists from this period, recorded later in the Codex Mendoza, show the incredible variety of what was demanded: jaguar skins, cotton cloth, cacao beans, turquoise, gold dust, rubber, and even exotic birds. Every corner of the empire contributed something, and this steady flow of wealth allowed Tenochtitlan to grow in power and beauty. In religion and art, too, the Aztecs reached their peak. The center of the city was dominated by the Templo Mayor, or Great Temple, dedicated to two major gods, Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and war, and Tlaloc, the god of rain and agriculture. The temple had twin staircases, each leading to a shrine at the top. During festivals, the steps would run red with blood as captives were sacrificed to keep the gods strong. To the Aztecs, these rituals were not acts of cruelty, but sacred duties. They believed the gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world, and it was the humans' responsibility to return the favor, to feed the gods with life so that the sun would rise each day. The Aztec religion was deeply connected to nature and time. Their calendars were among the most accurate in the world. They used two main systems: the Xiapawali, a 365-day solar calendar for farming and seasonal cycles, and the Tonopwali, a 260-day ritual calendar used for religious ceremonies. Together, they created a complex understanding of time, which the priests used to predict festivals, agricultural seasons, and even the fate of individuals. Every 52 years, when the two calendars aligned, the Aztecs held the new fire ceremony, a powerful ritual to renew the world and ensure the continuation of life. While religion united the empire, it was war that fueled it. The Aztecs saw battle as both a spiritual duty and a political necessity. Conquests brought new lands, resources, and prisoners for sacrifice. Every campaign expanded the empire's borders and reinforced Tenochtitlan's dominance. By the late 1400s, Aztec armies had reached as far south as modern-day Guatemala. They conquered cities like Chalco, Xochimilco, Cuauhtémoc, and Tehuantepec, bringing in more tribute and wealth. During this period, two rulers stood out for their contributions to the Aztec Golden Age: Aztecatl, 1469 to 1481 CE, and Itzcoatl, 1486 to 1502 CE. Aztecatl, the grandson of Moctezuma I, was a bold warrior who strengthened the empire through military campaigns. He led successful expeditions into the Toluca Valley, subduing rebellious towns and bringing more territory under Aztec control. However, he also faced challenges. His attempt to conquer the Tarascan Empire to the west ended in disaster. The Tarascans, also known as the Puripeka, had metal weapons and strong defenses. The Aztec army was crushed, suffering one of its worst defeats. It was a reminder that even at its height, the empire was not invincible. Despite these setbacks, Aztecatl is remembered for his efforts to improve Tenochtitlan's infrastructure. He expanded the city's markets, encouraged the arts, and commissioned new sculptures and monuments. He also fought a civil war against the neighboring city of Tlatelolco, which ended with Tenochtitlan absorbing it completely. From that point on, the Aztec capital became one unified city, combining political power and economic might. After Aztecatl's death, his brother Itzcoatl took the throne. He was known as one of the most ambitious and warlike rulers in Aztec history. Under his leadership, the empire reached its greatest territorial extent. He led conquests into the Mixtec and Zapotec regions of southern Mexico, expanding Aztec influence over mountains, jungles, and coasts. He was also responsible for major building projects in Tenochtitlan, including the reconstruction of the Templo Mayor, which was completed in 1487 CE. Itzcoatl celebrated the new temple's dedication with a massive festival that became legendary. Broad canals allowed canoes to travel between homes and markets. At the center stood palaces decorated with colorful murals and intricate carvings. The Tlatelolco market was the empire's economic heart, visited daily by up to 40,000 people. There, traders from across Mesoamerica sold everything from obsidian blades and copper tools to cacao beans and jade jewelry. Spanish eyewitnesses later described it as cleaner, better organized, and more impressive than any market in Europe. The Aztecs also valued education. Boys attended schools called Tlatelolco, where they learned military skills, history, and religion. Sons of nobles went to Acalmacac, where they were trained as priests, scholars, or administrators. Girls were taught domestic skills, weaving, and childcare, but also received moral and religious education. Literacy was rare, but priests and scribes used a system of pictographs to record laws, histories, and tribute lists. These codices became vital records of Aztec civilization. The Golden Age was not without problems, however. The empire's success depended on constant conquest and tribute. Many conquered peoples hated the Aztecs for their heavy demands and for taking captives for sacrifice. Rebellions were frequent, and putting them down required continuous warfare. The system worked, but only as long as the Aztecs could keep expanding. By 1502 CE, when a Huitzilopochtli died after a flood struck the city, Tenochtitlán was at the height of its glory, but also stretched to its limits. Only nobles and priests could approach him, and even they had to remove their shoes and lower their eyes. Under his rule, the empire reached its largest size. Moctezuma led campaigns across southern Mexico and parts of what is now Guatemala. But the more the Aztecs conquered, the more enemies they made. Many tribes paid heavy tribute in food, textiles, and captives for sacrifice. Others, like the Tlaxcalans, refused to bow to Aztec power and fought bitter wars against them. In Tenochtitlan, life was still glorious. The city, sitting in the middle of Lake Texcoco, held over 200,000 people, larger than most European cities at the time. Wide causeways connected it to the mainland, and canals crossed the city like streets. Marketplaces sold everything from obsidian tools to fine clothing. At the center stood the towering Templo Mayor, where priests offered hearts to the sun god Huitzilopochtli. The Aztecs believed the god Quetzalcoatl, a fair-skinned, bearded deity, had once left their lands but would one day return from the east. When reports came of strange men arriving on the coast, men with pale skin, beards, and ships larger than houses, Montezuma began to fear that the prophecy had come true. In 1517 CE, Spanish explorers led by Francisco Hernández de Córdoba landed on the Yucatan Peninsula. They were followed by Juan de Grijalva in 1518 CE, who sailed along the coast and received gifts from local chiefs. News of these foreigners reached Montezuma quickly. Messengers described their ships as floating mountains, their weapons as thunder, and their animals, horses, as giant deer. Montezuma ordered his priests to seek guidance from the gods. He also sent gifts of gold and precious objects to the strangers, perhaps to honor them or persuade them to stay away. But the Spaniards did not turn back. In 1519 CE, Hernán Cortés arrived with about 600 men, several cannons, and horses. He landed near modern-day Veracruz and immediately began to build alliances with native tribes who hated Aztec rule. The Totonacs and later the Tlaxcalans joined him, seeing the Spaniards as a chance to break free from Tenochtitlan's control. Montezuma received reports daily. The strangers were marching inland, fighting and winning against his enemies. Still uncertain whether Cortés was a god or a man, Montezuma chose to wait and watch. Inside the capital, tension grew. Some nobles urged Montezuma to destroy the invaders before they reached the valley. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, one of Cortés's soldiers, later wrote that they could hardly believe what they saw: towering temples, wide streets, and markets full of life. It was unlike anything in Europe. Montezuma welcomed Cortés personally, offering him flowers and gold necklaces. The two leaders faced each other, one representing the might of a native empire, the other the ambition of a foreign power. For a short time, peace seemed possible. The Spaniards were housed in the palace of Itzcoatl, a former emperor. Montezuma treated them as honored guests, hoping to understand who they were and what they wanted. But Cortés saw an opportunity. Within days, he took Montezuma hostage, claiming it was for his own safety. The emperor, shocked and humiliated, agreed to stay inside the palace. The Aztecs continued their daily lives, but unease spread through the city. Their ruler, chosen by the gods, was now a prisoner of strangers. While in captivity, Montezuma tried to maintain control. He continued to give orders, attended religious rituals, and sent messages to the provinces. But his authority was fading. The Spanish soldiers, meanwhile, searched for gold and melted down treasures into bars. They forced Aztec artisans to work for them, angering the population even more. In 1520 CE, while Cortés left temporarily to deal with a Spanish rival arriving at the coast, violence broke out. His deputy, Pedro de Alvarado, fearing an uprising, attacked the Aztecs during a festival at the Templo Mayor. Thousands of unarmed people were killed. When Cortés returned, the city was on the brink of rebellion. The Aztecs rose, surrounding the palace where the Spaniards were trapped. Montezuma tried to calm his people. He appeared on a balcony, speaking to them, asking for peace. But the crowd was furious. According to Spanish accounts, they threw stones and struck him down. The emperor died soon after, though whether by his people's hands or the Spaniards remains uncertain. His death marked the end of an era. In just a few months, everything had changed. The most powerful ruler in Mesoamerica was gone. The empire was in chaos. And the foreigners now fought for survival inside a city that had once welcomed them. The balance of power was shifting, and the fall of the Aztec Empire had begun. After Montezuma died in 1520 CE, the great city of Tenochtitlan erupted into chaos. The Spaniards were trapped inside the palace with thousands of angry Aztec warriors surrounding them. The streets that once carried traders and priests now ran with blood. The people who had once bowed to their emperor were now fighting to protect their city from foreign invaders. The Aztec Empire, which had ruled much of Mesoamerica for nearly 2 centuries, was facing its final and most brutal test. When Hernán Cortés returned from the coast, he found his men in desperate condition. The massacre at the Templo Mayor had destroyed any chance of peace. The Aztecs had chosen a new emperor, Cuauhtémoc, Montezuma's brother, who was determined to drive the Spaniards out. The air of Tenochtitlan, once filled with incense and music, now carried smoke, shouting, and the clash of obsidian blades against Spanish steel. The Aztecs used their knowledge of the canals and causeways to cut off the Spaniards' escape routes. Cortés realized that staying in the city meant death. On the night of June 30th, 1520 CE, he ordered his men to flee quietly across the western causeway. The Spaniards carried as much gold as they could, but their greed weighed them down. As they moved under the cover of darkness, the Aztecs discovered them. Horns sounded, and warriors attacked from canoes and the causeway. Arrows, stones, and spears rained down. Horses slipped into the canals, dragging their riders to their deaths. That night became known as La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. Hundreds of Spaniards and their native allies were killed. Gold, weapons, and bodies filled the canals. Cortés himself barely escaped with his life. He sat beneath a tree on the edge of Lake Texcoco, crying for the men he had lost. But his sorrow didn't last long. He was determined to return. The survivors retreated east to Tlaxcala, where their allies helped them recover. There, Cortés rebuilt his army. He gathered more native allies from groups who hated Aztec rule, the Totonacs, Texcacans, and others. They wanted freedom from tribute and sacrifice. In return, Cortés promised them peace and shared power, though he never truly meant it. Meanwhile, in Tenochtitlan, tragedy struck again. After Cuauhtémoc led the Aztecs to victory in La Noche Triste, a deadly disease spread through the city, smallpox, brought unknowingly by the Spaniards. It arrived with one of Cortés's men and spread quickly through the dense population. The Aztecs had never faced such an illness before. Their bodies had no defense. Within weeks, tens of thousands died, including Cuauhtémoc himself. Entire families vanished. Priests could no longer perform rituals. Fires burned constantly to purify the air, but it made no difference. In late 1520 CE, the Aztecs chose a new emperor, Cuauhtémoc, Montezuma's young nephew. He was brave, intelligent, and determined to defend his people. Though barely in his 20s, he inspired the remaining warriors to rebuild their defenses and prepare for war. Canals were blocked, bridges destroyed, and weapons reforged. The Aztecs knew the Spaniards would return, and they would be ready. Cortés spent months gathering forces. By early 1521 CE, he had over 700 Spaniards, thousands of native warriors, and dozens of ships called brigantines, which he built to control the lake around Tenochtitlan. The plan was simple but brutal: surround the city, cut off supplies, and starve it into surrender. In May 1521 CE, the siege began. The brigantines sailed across the waters of Lake Texcoco, attacking Aztec canoes. Spanish cannons fired from the ships and the causeways. Day after day, the Allies pushed forward, breaking bridges and capturing towns around the lake. Inside Tenochtitlan, Cuauhtémoc's warriors fought fiercely. They rebuilt bridges at night and attacked from the rooftops by day. The city became a battlefield. Streets turned into rivers of mud and blood. Temples that once echoed with songs of worship now burned. Yet the Aztecs refused to surrender. Women and children carried food and water through the canals. Priests prayed to Huitzilopochtli, asking for strength. Even as hunger spread, they believed the gods would save them. But the siege dragged on for weeks. The Spaniards cut off every path. Famine took hold. People ate anything they could find: grass, bark, even leather. Disease spread again, and corpses filled the canals. The great markets were empty, and the temples stood blackened by fire. Cortés offered Cuauhtémoc a chance to surrender, but the emperor refused. He said he would rather die defending his city than live as a slave. His words inspired his people, but their strength was fading. By July 1521 CE, the Spaniards and their allies controlled most of the city. They destroyed houses block by block, driving the defenders back toward the center. Cuauhtémoc made his last stand near the Templo Mayor, surrounded by what was left of his warriors. The once great capital of the Aztec world, with its shining temples, causeways, and markets, was reduced to ruins. On August 13, 1521 CE, Cuauhtémoc was captured while trying to flee across the lake. According to Spanish records, he was brought before Cortés. Exhausted, dressed in rags, and covered in ash, the young emperor stood tall. He reportedly said, "I have done all that I could to defend my people. Now take my knife and kill me." Cortés refused to kill him, not out of mercy, but because he wanted the location of hidden Aztec gold. With Cuauhtémoc's capture, the Aztec Empire fell. Tenochtitlan, once called the Venice of the New World, lay in ashes. The canals were filled with rubble, temples destroyed, and tens of thousands of bodies covered the streets. The lake that once sparkled with sunlight turned dark with blood. The fall of Tenochtitlan marked the end of one of the greatest civilizations in the Americas. Cortés immediately began rebuilding the city, naming it Mexico City, the capital of New Spain. Spanish churches replaced temples, and crosses rose where pyramids once stood. Survivors were forced into labor, carrying stones from their own fallen temples to build the new colonial capital. Cuauhtémoc lived for a few more years under Spanish captivity. In 1525 CE, while Cortés led an expedition to Honduras, he accused Cuauhtémoc of plotting a rebellion and ordered him executed. The last emperor of the Aztecs was hanged, ending the royal bloodline that had ruled since the founding of Tenochtitlan in 1325 CE. Yet, even in defeat, the spirit of the Aztec people did not vanish. Their traditions, languages, and beliefs survived in the hearts of their descendants. The Nahuatl language continued to be spoken, and stories of their gods and heroes passed through generations. The Spanish conquest destroyed their empire, but not their memory. Historians now see the fall of the Aztec Empire as one of the most important turning points in world history. It wasn't just a clash of armies, it was a meeting of worlds. The arrival of the Spaniards brought new weapons, diseases, and faiths, but it also ended centuries of Mesoamerican civilization. The conquest reshaped the Americas forever, leading to the rise of colonial rule that lasted for centuries. The story of the Aztecs' fall is not simply about defeat. It's about courage in the face of overwhelming odds, about a people who built one of the greatest cities in the ancient world, and about how that city was torn apart by ambition, fear, and fate. The year 1521 CE was one of the darkest and most dramatic moments in the history of the Aztec Empire. The once beautiful city of Tenochtitlan, built upon the shining waters of Lake Texcoco, became the heart of a brutal siege that would decide the future of an entire civilization. This was not only a battle of swords and spears, it was a clash between two worlds, the old and the new. By early May 1521, Hernán Cortés had gathered one of the largest armies ever seen in Mesoamerica. He had only about 700 Spanish soldiers, but tens of thousands of native allies, Tlaxcalans, Texcacans, and others, who had suffered under Aztec rule for years. These groups had long been forced to send tribute, pay taxes, and give captives for sacrifice. Now, they saw a chance for revenge. Cortés used their anger as fuel for his plan, to surround Tenochtitlan and crush the empire forever. He divided his army into three main forces. Pedro de Alvarado, Gonzalo de Sandoval, and Cristobal de Olid each led a group of Spanish soldiers and thousands of native warriors. Together, they would attack from the causeways that connected the island city to the mainland. At the same time, Cortés ordered the building of 13 brigantines, small warships, on the shores of Lake Texcoco. These ships, armed with cannons and sails, would block any supplies coming into the city and stop Aztec canoes from escaping. Inside Tenochtitlan, Emperor Cuauhtémoc prepared for the final defense. He was only about 25 years old, but his courage and leadership inspired everyone. The people rebuilt bridges, strengthened walls, and prepared stores of food and water. Priests stood at the temples praying to Huitzilopochtli, god of the sun and war, asking for strength. The Aztecs had faced wars before, but this time they fought not just for power, they fought for survival. When the Spanish attack began, it came from all sides. Cannons fired from the brigantines, shaking the ground. Aztec warriors filled their canoes and launched arrows and spears toward the invaders. Smoke covered the lake. The sound of drums, shouts, and explosions echoed between the mountains that surrounded the valley. At first, the Aztecs fought back fiercely. They knew every bridge, every canal, every narrow street. They used their canoes to strike quickly, retreating into hidden waterways when the Spanish advanced. The causeways became deadly traps. Spaniards marching across them were attacked from both sides, and many fell into the water, where Aztec warriors waited to strike. But slowly, the tide began to turn. The brigantines cut off the Aztec supply lines, and the causeways were broken piece by piece. The Spaniards destroyed bridges and blocked canals to isolate parts of the city. Starvation soon began to spread. Corn, beans, and fresh water became rare. Disease, smallpox, hunger, and infection swept through the population. Still, Cuauhtémoc refused to surrender. He believed the gods would not abandon their chosen city. Each day brought more fighting. The Spaniards advanced during the day, and at night, the Aztecs rebuilt their defenses. The air grew thick with smoke and the smell of decay. The once bright city, with its shining temples and busy markets, was now a ruin of broken walls and burned homes. The cries of warriors, women, and children filled the air. As weeks passed, the Spanish army tightened its grip. By June, they controlled most of the outer districts of the city. Thousands of people had died. Famine forced some to eat weeds, leather, and even wood. The Aztecs tried to break through the siege several times, launching desperate attacks by canoe, but the brigantines blocked them. Spanish cannons destroyed entire sections of the city, and the rubble filled the canals. The fighting became personal and savage. The Spaniards captured Aztec warriors and executed them publicly to spread fear. In response, the Aztecs captured Spanish soldiers and sacrificed them on the steps of the Templo Mayor. The prisoners' screams could be heard across the lake. The Spaniards were horrified, and it only made them fight harder. By July, Tenochtitlan was barely standing. Its once sparkling canals had turned into black pools filled with debris and bodies. Most of the temples were damaged, and thousands of homes were burned. Yet Cuauhtémoc and his people kept fighting. They believed that surrender would dishonor their gods and ancestors. Every man, woman, and child who could hold a weapon joined the defense. Cortés sent messengers offering peace in exchange for the emperor's surrender, but Cuauhtémoc refused every offer. He told his people that it was better to die defending their home than live as slaves under foreign rule. His words gave strength to those still standing. On August 1st, 1521 CE, the final stage of the siege began. The Spanish and their allies launched a massive assault on the city's center. Day by day, the Aztecs were pushed back toward the sacred district around the Templo Mayor. He told Cortés, "I have done what I could in defense of my people. Now take this dagger and end my life." But Cortés refused to kill him. He wanted to know where the Aztec treasures were hidden. Despite torture and pain, Cuauhtémoc never revealed anything. With his capture, the war was over. Tenochtitlan had fallen. The Aztec Empire, once the most powerful and advanced civilization in the Americas, was gone. The Spaniards entered the ruined city and found only silence. The lakes were filled with bodies, the temples reduced to stones. The smell of death and smoke hung in the air. For 3 months, Tenochtitlan had resisted one of the most brutal sieges in human history. But the combination of Spanish weapons, native allies, disease, and hunger proved impossible to overcome. It is estimated that more than 200,000 people died during the siege: warriors, priests, women, and children. Cortés wasted no time. He ordered the surviving Aztecs to clear the ruins and rebuild the city as the capital of New Spain. The Spanish called it Mexico City, which would grow into one of the most important colonial cities in the world. Churches replaced temples, and crosses rose where pyramids once stood. The canals were filled to make roads for Spanish horses and carts. Cuauhtémoc, the last Aztec emperor, lived for 4 more years. In 1525 CE, while on a campaign with Cortés to Honduras, he was accused of plotting a rebellion and was executed by hanging. His death marked the true end of the Aztec royal line, a symbol of both resistance and tragedy. But even though the empire was gone, the memory of the Aztecs could not be erased. Their language, Nahuatl, continued to be spoken. Their traditions and stories survived in secret. The people who had built Tenochtitlan became the foundation of a new world, one that mixed Spanish and native cultures into what would become Mexico. The siege of Tenochtitlan remains one of the most powerful stories in history. It was the end of a civilization that had built one of the greatest cities of the ancient world, a city of floating gardens, shining temples, and endless faith. It was also the beginning of a new and painful chapter, one that would shape the future of the Americas. In the ashes of their capital, the survivors carried the memory of who they were and what they had lost. Though the Spaniards claimed victory, the story of the Aztecs did not vanish. It lived on in language, art, and spirit, proof that even in destruction, their legacy would endure. When the fighting finally stopped in August 1521 CE, The once great city of Tenochtitlan was nothing more than a ruin. Smoke still rose from the broken temples, and the air smelled of ash and decay. The canals that once carried traders and priests were now filled with mud and debris. The cries of battle were gone, replaced by silence and the sound of weeping survivors. For the Aztec people, the fall of Tenochtitlan was the end of everything they had known. Their empire had lasted less than 200 years, but in that short time, it had become one of the most powerful and complex civilizations in the Americas. Now, it lay in ruins under the control of foreign conquerors. The Spaniards, led by Hernán Cortés, wasted no time claiming the land for their king, Charles V of Spain. Cortés ordered that the old city be torn down and rebuilt in a new image. The temples were destroyed stone by stone. The great pyramids that once reached toward the heavens were torn apart, and their stones were used to build churches and Spanish government buildings. The sacred center of the Aztec world, the Templo Mayor, was reduced to rubble. In its place, the Spaniards built the Cathedral of Mexico City, symbolizing the replacement of the old gods with the new religion of Christianity. The city that rose from the ashes of Tenochtitlan would be called Mexico City, the capital of New Spain. Cortés envisioned it as the heart of a new empire, one that would serve both Spain and the Christian faith. Spanish architects and engineers arrived to design straight roads, large plazas, and stone houses. The causeways that had once linked Tenochtitlan to the mainland were rebuilt, but this time for horses and carts instead of foot soldiers and canoes. The Aztec survivors were forced to help in the rebuilding. Thousands of them were enslaved or forced into labor under the system called encomienda, where Spanish settlers were given control of local communities in exchange for supposed protection and Christian teaching. In truth, it was little more than slavery. Many native people died from exhaustion, hunger, and new diseases brought from Europe. Among the ruins, the Spaniards searched for treasure. They believed the Aztecs had hidden vast amounts of gold before the fall. They tortured nobles and priests, demanding to know where it was buried, but most of the treasure was already melted down or lost in the lake during La Noche Triste. For Cortés, the real prize was not gold, it was power. By capturing the Aztec capital, he had gained control over a land rich in people, food, and natural resources. The arrival of the Spanish brought major changes to every part of life. They introduced new animals like horses, cattle, pigs, and sheep. They also brought wheat, sugar, and European tools. But along with these came disease, forced labor, and the destruction of entire cultures. Within a few decades, millions of native people across Mesoamerica had died, not only from war, but from sicknesses like smallpox, measles, and influenza, against which they had no immunity. Religion also changed. Spanish missionaries arrived soon after the conquest, determined to convert the native population to Christianity. The Aztec gods were declared false, and temples were turned into churches. Idols were smashed, and sacred books, called codices, were burned. But some friars, like Bernardino de Sahagun, saw value in the Aztec culture and began to record their stories, traditions, and beliefs. His work, the Florentine Codex, became one of the most detailed accounts of Aztec life ever written, preserving knowledge that might otherwise have been lost forever. Despite Spanish control, the Aztec spirit did not completely disappear. Many native people continued to speak Nahuatl, the language of the Mexica, and passed down their traditions secretly through stories and songs. Families remembered their ancestors' glory, the time when Tenochtitlan was a city of canals, markets, and golden temples. They held on to fragments of their identity even while living under colonial rule. The land itself still carried memories of the past. Beneath the new Spanish city, the foundations of Tenochtitlan remained. The Spaniards built over the ruins without fully destroying them. This discovery led archaeologists to uncover the remains of the Templo Mayor, confirming that the heart of the Aztec world still existed beneath modern Mexico City. Today, the ruins of the Templo Mayor have been carefully excavated and preserved. Visitors can walk through parts of the ancient city, seeing the stone steps and altars where Aztec priests once prayed to the gods. Museums now display the artifacts found there: pottery, weapons, jewelry, and even human remains that tell the story of Aztec life and sacrifice. The Spanish may have tried to erase the memory of the Mexica, but their legacy proved too strong. Their knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, agriculture, and engineering influenced later generations. Their chinampas, or floating gardens, remain one of the most advanced farming systems ever created, showing how they turned swampy land into fertile farmland. Even today, people in the region of Xochimilco, on the outskirts of Mexico City, still farm on remnants of these ancient floating fields, living proof of Aztec innovation. The Aztec calendar, with its precise understanding of time and the universe, continues to fascinate historians and scientists. Their language, Nahuatl, gave modern Spanish and English many words still used today. Chocolate, tomato, avocado, and coyote all come from Aztec origins. Their myths, stories, and art have inspired countless writers, filmmakers, and artists around the world. Under Spanish rule, life for the native population was difficult. They faced heavy taxes, forced conversions, and loss of land. But the mix of Spanish and indigenous cultures also created something entirely new: mestizo identity, the blending of European and native bloodlines that became the foundation of modern Mexican culture. The food, art, music, and traditions of Mexico today reflect this deep mixture of two worlds. Yet beneath every street and building lay the remains of the Aztec capital, the heart of a lost empire. Over the centuries, earthquakes and floods damaged many colonial structures, uncovering parts of the ancient city again and again. Each time archaeologists dug deeper, they found evidence of Tenochtitlán's greatness: sculptures, tools, murals, and human bones that told the story of the people who once ruled the Valley of Mexico. For modern Mexicans, the memory of the Aztecs is not only a story of conquest and loss, it is also a story of survival. The eagle and cactus, the same symbol that the Mexica saw in their prophecy before founding Tenochtitlan, now appear proudly on the flag of Mexico. It reminds the nation of its ancient roots, that even though the empire fell, its spirit never died. Every year, on the streets of Mexico City, people celebrate traditional Aztec dances, music, and rituals. Some groups still honor the old gods, while others see these traditions as a way to connect with their heritage. In schools, children learn about Moctezuma, Cuauhtémoc, and the great city that once stood beneath their feet. From empire to colony, from ruin to symbol, the legacy of the Mexica became part of a larger story: the birth of modern Mexico. The stones of Tenochtitlan, once buried under churches and streets, are now seen again, not as relics of defeat, but as reminders of resilience. 5 centuries later, archaeologists still uncover parts of the old city. Each discovery, a carved stone, a pottery fragment, a human skull, adds a new chapter to the story of the people who built one of the greatest civilizations in history. The ruins of Tenochtitlan whisper of a time when the Valley of Mexico shimmered with canals and temples, when warriors marched in bright feathers, and when an empire believed it could keep the sun alive through faith and sacrifice. When the Aztec Empire collapsed in 1521 CE, the world that followed was a shadow of what it used to be. The fall of Tenochtitlan didn't just destroy a city, it erased a way of life. The Aztecs had ruled over millions, built floating gardens, and honored gods who controlled the sun, rain, and stars. Now, their temples were rubble, their gods silenced, and their people forced to live under Spanish rule. Yet, even in defeat, the Aztec spirit refused to die. The years after the conquest were harsh. The Spanish wanted total control over every part of life in the former Aztec lands. They took the land, gold, and crops. They forced the people to work for them, to speak Spanish, and to become Christians. The Aztecs were made to forget who they were, but deep inside, they remembered. The stories, the language, and the prayers of their ancestors survived quietly through whispers, songs, and secret traditions. In 1524 CE, just 3 years after the fall, the Spanish sent a group of 12 Franciscan friars to begin the process of converting the native people. These men, often called the 12 Apostles of Mexico, built churches, schools, and missions. They taught Spanish, Latin, and Christian faith, but they also learned from the people. They saw that the Aztecs were not savages but a highly intelligent, organized, and artistic society. Some friars began to record what they learned. One of the most famous was Fray Bernardino de Sahagun, a Spanish priest who believed that understanding the Aztecs was important. He worked with native elders and scribes to collect their stories, traditions, and language. This project became known as the Florentine Codex, written in both Nahuatl and Spanish. It described everything about Aztec life, from gods and festivals to farming, food, and medicine. Even though Sahagun's goal was to preserve this knowledge for Christian teaching, his work became the single most valuable record of Aztec civilization ever made. Without it, much of what we know today about the Aztecs might have been lost forever. But while some Spaniards wanted to understand, others wanted to destroy. Temples were torn down. Statues were melted. Codices, the Aztec books made of bark and painted with bright symbols, were burned by the thousands. These codices held centuries of knowledge about astronomy, history, and religion. Only a few survived. The loss of these records was one of the greatest cultural disasters in human history. For the people who lived through this time, life was filled with pain and confusion. Diseases like smallpox, measles, and typhus killed millions of indigenous people in the first decades after the conquest. They had no resistance to these foreign sicknesses brought by the Europeans. Some villages lost almost everyone. Others were completely wiped out. The population of central Mexico dropped from around 25 million before the Spanish arrived to just a few million by the early 1600s. Still, the Aztec culture found ways to survive. In hidden corners of the countryside, communities continued old traditions in secret. They planted corn and offered small sacrifices to the rain god Tlaloc, or burned incense for Tenochtitlán, the mother goddess, though the Spanish said they were worshiping the Virgin Mary. In reality, many people saw Mary and Tenochtitlan as the same. This blending of Aztec and Christian beliefs became known as syncretism, a mix of two worlds that allowed old ideas to live inside new ones. Language was another survivor. Even though the Spanish tried to make Nahuatl disappear, it remained strong. It became one of the main languages of New Spain, used in markets, farms, and towns. Even some Spanish settlers learned it. The words from Nahuatl slowly entered Spanish and later English. Words like chocolate from Zacatl, tomato from Tomatl, avocado from Ahuacatl, and coyote from Coyotl came from the Aztec tongue. The language carried memories of the empire, hidden inside everyday speech. By the 1600s and 1700s, new generations had grown up in a world where Spanish culture dominated. The Aztec nobles who had survived the conquest became part of the colonial government. They learned Spanish law, dressed like Europeans, and helped collect taxes. Some even married into Spanish families. But even as they lived under the new system, they never completely gave up their identity. In private, they told their children about their ancestors, about the warriors, the emperors, and the sacred city built on the lake. One of the last Aztec rulers, Cuauhtémoc, became a powerful symbol. He had fought bravely against the Spanish and refused to betray his people, even when tortured by fire. The Spaniards executed him in 1525 CE, but in death, he became a hero. In later centuries, Mexicans would see him as a symbol of courage, honor, and resistance, the face of the nation's ancient pride. Statues of Cuauhtémoc now stand in Mexico City and across the country, representing the last voice of the Aztec Empire. As time passed, Mexico changed. The Spanish brought universities, printing presses, and new forms of government. They also created deep divisions between rich and poor, between Europeans and natives. But in the villages and the mountains, the Aztec heart continued to beat. People still celebrated festivals linked to the old calendar, still told stories of gods and heroes, and looked to the sun and stars for meaning. In 1810, almost 300 years after the conquest, Mexico began its War of Independence. Many of the revolution's leaders spoke of freedom not just from Spain, but also of reconnecting with the land's ancient roots. The Aztecs and other native civilizations became symbols of pride. The image of the eagle and serpent, which had guided the Aztecs to found Tenochtitlan, was adopted as a national emblem. When Mexico finally gained independence in 1821, it carried forward the memory of its indigenous past as part of its identity. Through the 19th and 20th centuries, archaeologists began to uncover more of the Aztec world. They dug beneath Mexico City and found the remains of temples, altars, and sculptures. Each discovery brought the past closer to life. In 1978, workers uncovered the massive stone carving of Cuauhtémoc, which led to the rediscovery of the Templo Mayor, the center of Tenochtitlan. This became one of the greatest archaeological finds in Mexican history. Today, the Aztec legacy is everywhere in Mexican culture. Their influence lives in food, language, art, and beliefs. Modern Mexicans still make tamales, tortillas, and chocolate drinks that trace back to Aztec traditions. Their festivals, like the Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos, echo ancient rituals of honoring ancestors. The Aztec sunstone, often called the calendar stone, remains one of the most famous symbols of Mexico, seen on flags, coins, and schools. But even with all this remembrance, historians continue to search for the real voices of the Aztecs, not just what the Spaniards wrote about them. Only fragments of native writings survived, and much of what we know comes from Spanish accounts written after the conquest. For centuries, the story of the Aztecs was told mostly from the viewpoint of the conquerors. Only recently have scholars worked to rebuild it from the Aztecs' perspective, using archaeology, oral history, and Nahuatl texts to tell their own story. The Aztec world was not perfect. It had wars, sacrifices, and strict hierarchies, but it was also filled with art, science, and spiritual meaning. They built a society where religion and politics worked together, where the calendar linked the heavens and earth, and where even the smallest seed had a sacred purpose. Their view of the universe saw balance in everything: life and death, light and darkness, rain and drought. To truly understand the rise and fall of the Aztec Empire is to see both the brilliance and the tragedy of human civilization. They rose from wandering tribes to become masters of a vast empire, and fell in less than 2 years to a handful of foreign invaders. Yet even in their fall, they shaped the world that came after. Modern Mexico stands on its foundations, literally and spiritually. Beneath the streets of Mexico City, the remains of Tenochtitlan still lie buried. When construction crews dig deep enough, they uncover pieces of Aztec pottery or fragments of temple walls. It is a reminder that the empire's heart still beats below the surface, waiting to be remembered. For young people growing up in Mexico and around the world, the Aztec story is more than ancient history. It's a lesson about strength, creativity, and resilience. It shows how a civilization can rise from nothing, build wonders that defy imagination, and leave behind a mark so deep that it survives centuries of conquest and change. Even though the Aztecs' temples are gone and their gods no longer worshipped, their spirit endures in language, in symbols, and in the pride of a people who refuse to forget. The fall of their empire was not truly the end. It was the beginning of a new story, one that continues today, beneath the sky that once shone over the lakes of Tenochtitlan. Centuries after the fall of Tenochtitlan in 1521 CE, the story of the Aztec Empire still echoes through the streets of modern Mexico City. Beneath the traffic, buildings, and concrete, the heart of the old city still beats quietly, hidden under layers of time. The people who live there today walk above the ruins of one of the greatest civilizations in history. Every stone buried beneath their feet has a story to tell, a story of faith, innovation, and survival that never truly ended. In 1978, this buried past spoke again. Workers laying electrical cables in downtown Mexico City uncovered a massive circular stone, a carved image of Cuauhtémoc, the moon goddess. Her body was broken into pieces, just as the old legends described when her brother Huitzilopochtli defeated her in battle to bring light to the world. This discovery led archaeologists to dig deeper. Soon, they found the remains of the Templo Mayor, the great temple of the Aztecs, once the sacred center of Tenochtitlan. The Templo Mayor had been hidden for more than 450 years, covered by Spanish buildings and forgotten by many. Its discovery shocked the world. For the first time, archaeologists could touch the stones that had once stood at the heart of the Aztec universe, where priests offered sacrifices to the gods, where emperors prayed for victory, and where thousands of people gathered for ceremonies that connected the heavens and the earth. The excavation revealed altars, sculptures, pottery, and even human remains. Layers of offerings were buried beneath the temple. Seashells from the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, jade from Guatemala, and obsidian from the mountains. Each object told a story of trade, power, and belief. The finds showed that Tenochtitlan was not only the center of an empire, but also the spiritual heart of a world connected by rivers, trade routes, and sacred rituals. As archaeologists studied the site, they uncovered new details about how the Aztecs lived, built, and worshipped. They learned that the Templo Mayor had been rebuilt 7 times, each layer marking the reign of a new ruler. The structure grew taller and grander with every generation, showing how faith and politics worked together in Aztec society. The deeper they dug, the older the temple became, a timeline carved in stone. The discovery of the Templo Mayor helped the people of Mexico reconnect with their ancient roots. For many, it was a moment of pride, proof that their ancestors were not lost or forgotten, but still part of who they were. It also helped rewrite history. For a long time, the story of the Aztecs had been told mostly from the viewpoint of the Spanish conquerors. Now, with every artifact uncovered, the Aztecs could finally speak for themselves. Today, the site of the Templo Mayor stands beside the Metropolitan Cathedral, the grand church built by the Spanish on the ruins of the old city. The two buildings stand side by side, one representing the world before the conquest, the other the world after. Together, they show the meeting of two civilizations that shaped modern Mexico. Visitors from around the world come to walk among the temple ruins, to look at the carvings, and to imagine the sounds of drums and chanting that once filled the air. In museums, schools, and homes, the Aztec legacy continues to live. The National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City holds thousands of Aztec artifacts, from the famous sunstone, also known as the Aztec calendar, to the statues of gods like Tlaloc and Itzcoatl. The sunstone itself is one of the most recognized symbols of Mexico. Carved in the 15th century, it represents the Aztec understanding of time and the universe, the story of the 5 suns, or 5 ages of creation and destruction. According to Aztec belief, the world had already been created and destroyed 4 times before. Each age ended with disaster, one by jaguars, one by wind, one by fire, and one by floods. The current world, the fifth sun, was created when the gods sacrificed themselves to restart time. But this sun, too, was destined to end one day. That belief gave deep meaning to Aztec rituals. Every offering, every prayer, every sacrifice was meant to keep the sun alive, to delay the end of the world for another day. Today, the fifth sun still inspires people in Mexico and beyond. It has become a symbol of resilience, the idea that even when one world ends, another can rise. The Aztec calendar design appears on flags, murals, coins, and even sports team logos. The image of the eagle and the serpent, which once marked the site where Tenochtitlan was founded, still sits proudly in the center of the Mexican flag. It reminds everyone of the prophecy that gave birth to an empire. But the Aztec legacy isn't only in symbols, it's in the people. Millions of Mexicans today carry Aztec ancestry, and more than 1.5 million still speak Nahuatl, the language of the Mexica. In villages, schools, and universities, people are working to keep Nahuatl alive, teaching new generations to speak the words their ancestors once spoke. Through language, they preserve a way of seeing the world that values balance, respect for nature, and connection between humans and the divine. The old Aztec calendar continues to fascinate scientists and historians for its accuracy. The Aztecs were skilled astronomers who could predict solar eclipses and track the movements of Venus. They built their temples and cities according to celestial patterns, aligning them with the sunrise and sunset on key dates. This knowledge wasn't just science, it was sacred. To the Aztecs, understanding the stars was a way of understanding the will of the gods. In schools across Mexico, children learn about the Aztec Empire as part of their national identity. They study the great rulers, Itzcoatl, Moctezuma I, and Cuauhtémoc. They learn about the markets of Tlatelolco, where goods from across Mesoamerica were traded, the chinampas that made the lakes bloom with crops, and the temples that reached toward the heavens. These lessons remind them that Mexico's history didn't begin with Spanish conquest, but with civilizations that built wonders long before Europeans arrived. Around the world, the Aztecs have become a subject of fascination. Historians, artists, and filmmakers explore their story, the rise from humble beginnings, the brilliance of their city, and the tragedy of their fall. Yet what draws people most is not just their downfall, but their creativity, their knowledge, and their unbreakable faith in their gods and themselves. In recent years, DNA research has helped reveal more about who the Aztecs were and where they came from. Studies show that their ancestors were part of a long line of civilizations that lived in Mesoamerica for thousands of years. People who built Teotihuacan, the Toltecs, and others. The Aztecs inherited their ideas, technologies, and religious beliefs, adding their own innovations to create something entirely new. Modern artists and writers continue to draw inspiration from Aztec culture. You can find murals in Mexico City, painted with scenes of Tenochtitlan, the canals, the warriors, the temples glowing in the sun. Poets write in Nahuatl, musicians blend ancient instruments with modern sounds, and teachers use Aztec symbols to teach lessons about history and identity. Each creative act is a way of keeping the fifth sun shining a little longer. Even in daily life, the Aztec influence can be seen everywhere, in food, language, and tradition. Corn, chocolate, and chili peppers, all central to Aztec cuisine, are still at the heart of Mexican cooking today. Festivals like Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, have roots in Aztec beliefs about honoring ancestors and celebrating the cycle of life and death. What began as sacred rituals now unite millions of people every year in color, song, and remembrance. For young people, the story of the Aztecs offers lessons that go beyond history. It shows the power of imagination and the strength of belief. The Mexica built a city on water, turning swamps into farmland and isolation into an empire. They proved that determination and vision could turn the impossible into reality. And even when everything was taken from them, their land, their temples, their freedom, they still found ways to survive, adapt, and pass their story forward. Today, walking through Mexico City, you can see skyscrapers rising over the ruins of Tenochtitlan. Yet every few years, new construction projects uncover pieces of the old empire, pottery, stone carvings, or foundations of temples. Each discovery reminds the world that history is not dead. It sleeps beneath us, waiting to be remembered. The Aztec Empire may have fallen in 1521 CE, but its echoes remain strong. In every word of Nahuatl spoken, in every child who learns about the eagle and the cactus, in every celebration of the sun and the dead, the fifth sun still burns. The Aztecs believed the world would one day end, but they also believed that renewal was always possible. Their story proves that even in destruction, something new can rise. From 1325 to 1521 CE, the Aztecs built one of the most powerful civilizations on Earth. Their rise from wanderers to empire builders changed history. Their fall changed it again. But what they left behind, their knowledge, symbols, and spirit, continues to shape the modern world. The stones of Tenochtitlan still whisper through time, carrying the voices of the people from Aztlan who dreamed of a city that would touch the heavens. And though the empire is gone, the prophecy of the eagle and the serpent lives on, not as a memory of what was lost, but as a reminder of what endures. The fifth sun still shines over Mexico, lighting the path of a nation built upon the foundations of its ancient heart.